So the left is really insistent, for the party of science that thinks you can drop rocks from the moon and they will actually destroy the earth, that party of science also doesn't seem to understand that men are men and women are women, and they can't magically change sex. So Ben Ferguson, who's a talk show host in the middle of the country, he was on CNN with Chris Cuomo, and he was talking about this case in Texas that we talked about earlier in the week, in which this girl who is on steroids, I mean, she's on testosterone, she wrestled a bunch of other girls in the Texas high school wrestling championships, and she won. Because it turns out that girls on steroids are able to outcompete other girls. And this has been a problem ever since the East Germans used to drug up their women for swimming, and then they'd win all the medals, and then it would come out later that they were all drugged up. This has been a problem for a long time. Chris Cuomo, however, on CNN, who is thick as a block of wood, cannot understand why anyone would have objections to any of this.
The irony is that if there were acceptance, we wouldn't have had this issue because this kid would be wrestling against boys. But just so we know, and for those as you're learning about this issue.
But even then, though,
let me just so people know.
Here's the thing.
Well, hold on, Ben.
Sure.
Let's just clarify one thing. The science you have to be very careful about, okay?
But to say that we should change the entire way that sports is done because of one person and their decision to do something, that is unrealistic.
But the premise is flawed because the logic requires you to believe that of course you do. That's why we're having the discussion. That transgender doesn't count. But it does count, and that's why we're having this bigger debate about what you allow trans kids to have access to and what you don't.
That if you are born a boy, that you use the boys' restroom / locker room.
But what if you identify as a girl?
You go in.
But you're you're simplifying the idea of gender and sex. Look, we've heard this. This is not a novel concept.
Chris,
we have the Fourth Circuit.
Chris,
the Fourth Circuit just said what I'm saying.
Okay, and the Fourth Circuit is wrong because this is silly. Okay, the fact is this. If you're going to separate gender from sex, and you're just going to say that what gender is however you feel in your head, then there aren't two genders, right? There's no transgenders. There's not two genders. There's not 50 genders, as Facebook would have you believe. There are infinite numbers of genders, right? Because I am Ben-gendered, right? In my head, my gender is exactly what I say it is. And in your head, you have the number of genders that you say you have. The fact is that if you want to make gender so specific that it's just what's going on in your mind, then why box it into a various series of categories? Why not instead just say that you are, Bob gendered or military or Millie gendered, right? You have your own gender. The problem is once you separate off biology and gender, then you end up in this la-la land where basically we just say, okay, fine, we'll treat you as individuals with regard to your quote-unquote gender, but your sex is still the governing body. And that's the problem the left can't deal with. So instead what they try to do is they try to create this tenuous linkage between sex and gender, even though gender is basically a made-up term. Sex is sex. End of story. They've tried to basically say that you can have a female brain in a male body. There's no evidence of that. The scientific studies that try and make claims about neurological density between transgender men and transgender women being similar to the sex they claim membership to, those studies are very, very small in sample size. They typically survey like 7 or 8 people who are transgender. They're self-selected, so you don't actually have a good basis for comparison. Really what you'd want to do is sample 1,000 women and then see if all the women who had the most neurological density in certain parts of their brain, were all those women transgender? If the answer is yes, then maybe you have something. If the answer is no, then there's no correlation even. So these studies are really poorly done. They don't hold up under scrutiny. The fact is this. We just don't know that much about how the human brain works. And I would assume that if you are transgender and if you have some sort of mental disorder, that there is a biological basis for the mental disorder. Nobody's claiming that it's you're faking it or that you're choosing to be this thing. But that doesn't change the fact that your sex is your sex, and your sex is chromosomally determined. It is biologically determined. Chris Cuomo pretending he doesn't understand that. Maybe he doesn't understand it. Maybe he's just that dumb.
Hello, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm a huge fan. You're one of the biggest role models for me. I've seen you so many times.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
My question basically is, as obviously a black man, how would...
I missed it, sorry. When I say I'm colorblind, I mean I'm like physically colorblind.
And as a conservative who, one, does not believe in white privilege, I don't believe that exists, and as someone who believes in individualism and does not believe that he is a victim, I'm obviously at, in my opinion, the greatest university, how do I basically combat primarily other blacks who basically call me names, the classics, Uncle Tom, all that jazz. And how do I combat that and basically explain to them how they, like me, are not victims?
So, I think that the first thing that you have to do is something that you've already talked about, which is just you have to say You're an individual, I'm an individual. Let's stop talking as black people and let's start talking as individuals. Now, as an individual, would you like to succeed in life? Would you like, and this is what you should say, right? You should say, do you want to succeed in life? Because you're obviously succeeding. But there are a lot of people who are not. And one of the great barriers to success is feeling that you're a victim and feeling that society is putting you behind the 8 ball. How about try my way for a year? Right? Try my way for a year, where you ignore the societal obstacles that face you, and you just put your nose to the grindstone and you work really hard. And I promise you, there are going to be a lot of people out there who are willing to help you and want to see you succeed. And no one has ever gotten ahead by complaining about the society itself. The way that you get ahead in America, at least in a free country, right? In an oppressive country, then maybe this helps. But in a free country, then the only way you get ahead is as an individual. You know, if someone wants to, first of all, I think that if someone attributes a name to you like that, the first thing that you can say is that if someone says, you know, you're an Uncle Tom, I think the first thing that you should say is, well, no, you're an asshole. So because there's more evidence that you're an asshole than that you're an Uncle Tom. And I mean that very seriously. Slurring people without evidence is one of my least favorite games. And if somebody slurs you that way, I'm not sure you can honestly have a great conversation with them anyway. But I think that when you treat people as individuals, there's a certain seductive nature to that, because everyone in the end wants to be treated as more than their skin color. I think you're doing a great job of that right now. I think I'm probably talking to a future senator from the state. So thanks for coming. Thanks for asking the question. Targeted her on some of the neo-Nazi websites. And these people are scum, and anybody who has granted them an inch of space is similarly scum. So I just want to call them out and note, you are scum, you are pathetic, and the fact that you sit in your basements masturbating to anime does not mean that worth in any human level, you stupid, despicable human beings. Okay. Other things that I hate. So Stephen Colbert did an entire shtick yesterday because Donald Trump Jr. put out a tweet. And the tweet that Donald Trump Jr. Put out was a tweet of his daughter, and he said that he was telling her that he was going to take half her candy on Halloween to teach her what socialism was. Okay, you know, kind of funny. And Stephen Colbert goes after Donald Trump Jr., as Stephen Colbert is apt to do.
Last night, Don Jr. tweeted a picture of his young daughter holding her candy bucket and said, I'm going to take half of her candy tonight and give it to some kid who sat at home. It's never too early to teach her about socialism. Yes, it's never too early to teach kids the danger of sharing. On Halloween, kids literally go door to door to get free candy from the neighbors because the kids don't have it and the neighbors do. That's socialism. Also, give it to some kid who sat at home. You know Halloween is fun, right? No child in the history of childing has ever voluntarily missed Halloween. I'm worried that kid didn't go out. Why? Is he okay? Is that child caring for a sick parent? You know what would be a nice thing to do? Give him half your Halloween candy.
Okay, so this is such a misread of socialism, it's quite astonishing. So first of all, Halloween is not socialism, and sharing is not socialism. Voluntary sharing is not socialism. Okay, voluntary sharing is not socialism. It's called charity. We do it all the time. Okay, when you give out candy on Halloween, you're not being a socialist. You are sharing things. Okay, socialism is when the government forces you to share things. Socialism is when the government comes in and mandates that you share your candy, Stephen Colbert, you stupid idiot. Okay, the idea that socialism is just sharing is belied by, the 100 million dead people over the last century who failed to share voluntarily enough and therefore were taken off to the gulags or shot in mass graves. So no, not quite the same thing. As far as this idea that, there's a poor child in need and so you should really give that child half your candy, again, that's up to me. I may agree with you, Stephen Colbert, but the idea that Donald Trump Jr.'s daughter should have to give half her candy, I think that the better plan there would probably be for Donald Trump Jr. as a very wealthy man to get that kid some candy if that kid needs charity. But I'm not going to enforce it with the power of government. So, again, the deliberate misread on socialism here is pretty astonishing, and it just shows how the left thinks about socialism. They think about it as a benevolent, wonderful thing that really has no downside, except for the whole we have to shoot people if they refuse to abide by my version of what charity ought to constitute. Okay. Quick big idea here on the Ben Shapiro Show. So every Thursday we go through a big idea. One of the big ideas today that we're going to do is stare decisis. So Clarence Thomas did an interview with Laura Ingraham, which was quite good yesterday. Laura clerked for Thomas on the Supreme Court, and Thomas was asked about his judicial philosophy. And I'm going to explain what differentiates Clarence Thomas from Justice Scalia and why I actually prefer Clarence Thomas to Justice Scalia's jurisprudence, even though I love Justice Scalia's writing.
Your philosophy is described as alternatively formalistic, rigid, strictly conservative. How do you describe your philosophy, Justice?
I think it's get it right. It's the, I think we are required to reason to a conclusion, and that's what we try to do, and try to do it in a way that it is accessible to regular people.
And when you read Thomas's decisions, first of all, they are very clear and they're very easy to read. But one of the things that differentiates Clarence Thomas from Justice Scalia is Justice Scalia believed to a certain extent in stare decisis. That literally means the case has been decided. It's what we call precedent. And the problem with Justice Scalia's take on this is that if you believe in precedent, you have to pick and choose which precedent you choose to uphold. And you can either have a blanket rule that a case that has been decided on similar merits must stand, or you can choose a rule that says, I don't care what the case decided before. If it's not right, then it's not right. Cases in which this comes up, Roe v. Wade, right? Do we abide by Roe v. Wade? It's stare decisis, right? It's a case that's been decided about abortion. Do we just abide by it, or is the case wrong? Thomas would say, I don't care whether the case has already been decided. They got it wrong. I'm going to overrule it. The same thing holds true for things like Dred Scott or Plessy v. Ferguson or Buck v. Bell. There are a bunch of really bad cases in American history. Korematsu. Bunch of really bad cases in American history. Do you just abide by them because stare decisis? So Justice Scalia never really had a consistent rule as to which cases he would abide by, which precedent he would abide by. Thomas does have a consistent rule. That rule is if the case is wrong, I overrule it. And the case can be wrong based on them getting the case wrong at the time. This is why I think that Justice Thomas is actually a more conservative justice, a more constitutional justice than Justice Scalia, even though they voted together most of the time. Thomas's jurisprudence is, I think, more solid and a better basis for constitutionalism than Justice Scalia's, even though I'm a big Scalia admirer and Scalia was quite brilliant. Okay, so we'll be back.